Welcome back to your favorite sales podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have another very special guest. We have Dana Therrien, the VP of Sales Performance Management at Anaplan. So all things best practices with their largest strategic customers. Really excited to get into it today. Thanks for making the time. Appreciate
Hi,
you
Ross. Nice,
joining.
nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, before we nerd out on all things sales planning and leadership, would love to have the audience get to know you a little bit. Would love to hear a bit about your journey, how you found yourself in this role, and I doubt at 6 years old you were thinking, how do I end up as a VP at in sales performance management? So curious to hear a bit about your journey.
At 6 years old, that role was far from being in existence. So
Astronaut or sales performance management and revenue
yeah,
supervisor?
I think it's pretty interesting. I think maybe I always gravitated towards strategy, and that's how I ended up in that role. Even as a little kid, I was probably trying to figure out world dominance. But
Franchising out the lemonade stands.
yeah, yeah. I started my career I have a degree in accounting. I started my career in the U.S. military. I was commissioned as a Army officer, and they had a finance corps, if you can believe that. So I had some pretty cool
Army
assignments.
finance.
Yeah, I was assigned. My first assignment was at NATO headquarters in Belgium. I spent 3 years there,
Very
and then I
cool.
went to U.S. Army intelligence in the D.C. area. I spent 5 years, and then when I left there, I ended up getting into operations roles in a number of different companies. Probably one of the bigger ones was Lucent Technologies back then. People probably have never heard of it, but it was huge back in the mid '90s. And then eventually, I did an MBA from Boston University. I was talking to a friend of mine. He said, "You don't really have sales in your title." And at the time, they were looking for an operations resource to manage it wasn't Lucent, we'd gotten spun off as Avaya, but they were looking for an operations leader to partner with the sales leader for the Northeast region. It was about a $300 million business. So it was before sales operations really existed, but I was the one responsible for helping with the sales strategy, with setting territories, with setting quotas, managing the budget. The CRM at the time was something called Siebel, which now everyone's
Yep.
on Salesforce. And I just stayed in that role from the early 2000s and continued to evolve throughout it, leading global sales and revenue operations for lots of different companies. And then about 20 years into it, I went to work for a company called Serious Decisions, which was a research and advisory practice. I think of it as becoming a college professor of my profession. I had an
Yep.
opportunity to do lots of research, share that research with many different companies, and also work with all the vendors that were selling into the space.
Yep.
And that's how I ended up at Anaplan, because they were looking for somebody who had sat in that chair, understood the
Yeah, an
solutions that they
expert in
were
the
creating.
space. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been with Anaplan pretty much ever since. Now I work with our largest customers and prospects and helping them understand what other companies are doing in sales and revenue operations, and also helping them understand how Anaplan can help them.
Very cool. Well, I
That was
mean,
a long answer.
no, I appreciate it. I'm curious. You've seen kind of the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to um, sales operation. Very meta. Both doing research at companies in the past as an operator, and now kind of advising some of the best in class companies to do it themselves. Um, Maybe before we actually get into those questions, it's the last question about your personal journey. What's one thing that you think really stands out as one of the most challenging but like highest ROI things as an operator do from like a sales operations perspective? And I know you might say compensation. Maybe we'll stay away from that, or sales
Yeah.
planning stuff with Anaplan. Just something that you feel like from a couple decades of operating, you feel like really stands out as something that you kind of figured out and might not be as obvious for folks that are kind of earlier in
Well, you're right.
their career.
Compensation is the obvious answer because so many companies have overcomplicated it and they've demotivated their sales force. But on top of that, really account segmentation and understanding the market and the opportunities you have as a company to pursue different areas of the market and the types of resources that you're going to deploy against those opportunities. It's really the basis of all strategy and planning.
Hmm.
Yeah, some companies would call it market analysis, but it's deeper than that because you want to understand who your customers are, who your potential prospects are, who your ideal customer profile is. And with that, well, I came from the military, right? And that's how I ended up here. I view markets as the battlefield,
Hmm.
and you need to understand where the challenges are on that battlefield and where to deploy your resources and your forces. So it goes from segmentation into capacity planning and figuring out what types of salespeople, the types of overlays, the numbers of people that you need to put, the kinds of support that they need, the training, the enablement, all of it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you call that out because I think one of, coming from being a seller and sales manager to now leading a company, I think one of the biggest unlocks in my mind was when you think about product market fit, a lot of people think about furthering the product to fit the market, not necessarily what part of the market you're going after. And that kind of sounds like it kind of ties into what you're talking about, which is you can actually pivot, not necessarily the product, the company, but actually the market you're targeting. And you can kind of figure out where it's easier versus harder. And that's been a really big unlock for us.
Yeah, when people ask me what types of companies should I pursue, for a career, number one is look for the one that has the best product market fix because your life will be easier there.
Yes.
You're in a growing market, in an underserved market, and the growth is just sort of happening organically, 20, 30, 40, 50%. You think about Google in the early days and Amazon Web Services. I mean, it just exploded.
Picking market, might be the most important thing compared to anything else you can.
But if you're in a challenging market like telco, it's a shrinking market with increased competition, and you have to really fine tune your plans and figure out how you're going to do things most productively.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good call out. Yeah, it makes life a lot easier if you're in a growing space versus shrinking. And I find that the culture of the market changes a ton too. If you're in a market that's shrinking, just it's not as fun and as engaging when folks aren't necessarily happy with how things are going.
Yeah, if you have an opportunity to go join an AI company that's doing well right now, do it. Just go. You'll be happy you did it.
Totally.
You're gonna go for quite a ride.
Exactly. Well, shifting gears a bit from kind of your journey to kind of all things sales planning for the go-to-market leaders out there that feel like maybe their organization is running as smoothly as it should, a bit broken. Where would you start? Like, what's the foundation? Is it the segmentation? Like, what's kind of the building blocks of effective sales strategy and planning?
Well, all of the challenges around strategy and planning fall on the backs of the sales and the revenue operations teams and leaders out there. And I think that me included, we'd gotten so used to the inefficiencies in the planning process and the tight deadlines and then the quick turnarounds on massive changes that were going to change the entire scope of the operations for the next 12 months and the midnight hours spent. You don't have to live that way. You should be thinking about how you can plan more efficiently and more effectively with speed, agility, and accuracy throughout whatever the length of the planning process is. Most companies, it's 3 to 6 months. I think of it as building the process, the scaffolding that will get you through that. So the operations leaders out there, most of them are rebuilding everything in spreadsheets. They're asking themselves, where's the information? How do I get it? How do I keep it updated? How do I share it? How do I help the teams analyze it? How do I get it back? And then how do I feed it into all the downstream processes that need it, like the CRM and the ICM tool? It's all pretty much manual processes. And one of the reasons why I joined Anaplan was because it was a platform that put all those processes in place and it connected everybody to the necessary data and put workflows on top of it so that you could spend that entire 3 to 6 months in planning and strategy and 0% of it in data quality, assembly, construction. It's like showing up at a job site and having it prepared for you to be there rather than having to go and stage the entire thing every single time you go through it. So I would say that the advice I have to everybody out there is perfect that process and immortalize it in some sort of a tool, whether it be Anaplan or something else, so that you don't have to go back there and do the job prep every single time you show up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's also just super unengaging work to be just, battling over the data and workflows versus
well, it's frustrating.
The work itself,
And I've given up on, you go through that 3 to 6 month process and you've got executives and tons of people involved in the process and they all want to weigh in and make decisions and they often don't do it in a timely fashion. So they're missing deadlines. They still want everyone to leave sales kickoff with a compensation plan, territory, and quota in hand, but they'll hold off on making decisions until midnight the night before and then tell the operations teams to get it done. And I think we just have to live under the expectations that they're going to continue to do that. It's not great behavior, but you can't really change it. So if you're living in that world, you need a platform that give you the ability to assimilate all those changes with a moment's notice and cascade it throughout the entire process, so you can still do it and be accurate.
Yeah. So what are those like key artifacts, right? So we've talked a bit of you've already mentioned like, capacity planning and territories and quota. Like if you would have to stack rank the most important, outputs from a strategy and operations team.
Well, I think where most companies are starting now is in that territory and quota process. They've got a financial plan from finance. They've
Yep.
converted that into a sales plan, and now they need to be able to cascade that throughout the world through the theaters, the areas, the regions, and the individual contributors. That's a really good place to start in perfecting that process first,
Well,
because it's the
yeah,
last one.
I know teams that sometimes, halfway more than halfway through Q1, they get their plan. And then maybe it changes in Q2. And like, how do you, especially for larger sales cycles, how do you plan for your quota if you don't even have that, 20%, 15% of the way into the year? That's a huge, impact.
Yeah, the Sales Benchmark Index just produced a piece of research a couple of months ago. They showed that companies that are able to achieve what they call a fast start, which is everyone leaves their sales kickoff with all the information they need. They grow at an average of 11%, and those that don't, it's more like 3%.
Wow.
And the ones that don't start with a fast start almost never, ever catch up, because you've got a distracted sales force in Q1. As much as we'd like to believe that they're going to do the right thing, they're not going to invest themselves in an account in a territory that they're not assured of having
Why would you?
at the end of the planning process. That's right. I mean, it's just human behavior. So I really do think that's the number one thing is hit the ground running. Everyone needs to leave sales kickoff with a territory quota compensation plan that's accurate and believable and understandable, and you'll have a good Q1, and then you're not going to spend the next 9 months trying to catch up for a delay in that entire process. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, I agree. What does a good territory, what does great look like when it comes to territory planning?
Well, we've raised the expectations on that because our employees don't put up with what they used to put up with back 15, 20 years ago when I started doing this. They expect the same level of due diligence to be put into their territory, their quota, their compensation plan as is put into that of the CRO and the CSO. They want to understand the math. They want you to explain it to them. They want you to sell that quota to them and help them understand why and how it was set, and help them believe that it's achievable. If they can see through unrealistic numbers, they'll leave quickly. And the first ones to leave the company are not the low performers.
They're the best.
It's the high performer. And when you lose one of them, you're really losing 5 people.
Yeah, no, that's a really good call out. It's the best folks that are leaving, and like you're saying, that it's kind of exponential, especially if they've been there for a bit and have those relationships. Actually, this is a great question for you. I didn't even have this prepared, but it comes up all the time when we're talking to high performance sales teams. Why does it seem like when reps, either in AE or AMs build these great relationships with accounts, that oftentimes those accounts are shuffled consistently at larger companies?
I think it's because the company becomes a slave to the model that they've designed. And oftentimes the model is set by the board, it's set by the executives, it's set by finance. A good example of when that might occur is we've had this model in place, and now we're switching to a hunter farmer model going forward next year. And we're bound and determined to make that happen because we have a brand new CRO, and he's done that at every other company, and he's going to do it. He doesn't know anything about the company he just joined or the customers, but he's moving to that hunter farmer model. So therefore, he's going to break all the relationships that have been in place regardless, and you can't convince him otherwise.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's sort of insanity.
It's very tops down. But you even see successful companies like Salesforce is famous for it. Is you get these accounts, you get this territory for 1 year or even 6 months. You do all that hard, heavy lifting, the outreach, the cold stuff, all the connective tissue there, which leads to revenue. And then you get moved, or the territories get moved. And it feels very not bottoms up if you actually understand the work to be done.
They do it, but I'll give them a little bit of credit. Right? They've got 22,000 quota carrying heads. Can you imagine the scale of that, and plus 13 or 14 different business units for all these different
The
companies.
overlay is insane. Yeah, to figure out all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
they've got Slack and MuleSoft and Sales Cloud and Marketing Cloud and you name it,
Yeah.
Tableau. I'll give them a little bit of credit because they're dealing with on a massive scale across 22,000 people and all these different overlays. They get a little bit of flexibility in that department, and I'll also give them some additional credit because I've worked with a lot of people over there, and they say, look, we will never sacrifice the process for profitability. So that means that they really try to restrain themselves in top-down solutions that are forced upon the field for the sake of conformity. They really try to allow their field organizations to be as adaptive to the market as they possibly can. And yeah, they make mistakes like we mentioned, but also just think about where they were in 2005 versus where they are now. They become they're the dominant player in SPM. And yeah, they've made mistakes and a lot of glass was broken, but wow, what a growth.
It is pretty incredible the scale that they're at. Sometimes you forget when you see the numbers. You're like, oh wow, that's a really, really, really big business.
Yeah.
Well, maybe with the last 5 minutes, switching gears to folks that you mentioned, you give them a lot of credit. Like, who else do you think does this stuff really well? I hear a lot of names like maybe the ServiceNows of the world. Like, who do you think are kind of at the forefront of great sales strategy and operations?
Yeah, well, you can't really argue with the success of Amazon Web Services, with ServiceNow, with Workday.
Yeah, Workday is a machine.
Yeah, those companies have just gone a long way. But I'll also give, Anaplan some credit too. But 6 years ago when I joined, it was a $450 million company. It's now a $1.1 billion company. And it's a tough market that we serve, and it's really a new paradigm that we're selling in the SPM space, that you don't have to live with the headaches that you've been living with in sales performance management with disconnected processes from territory and quota, account segmentation, capacity planning, incentive compensation management. It's a new way of thinking that it would be integrated on a single platform. So I think we've done a pretty good job in competing in a really tough market.
What do you think those things are that separate the best from the rest? Right, you mentioned a handful of companies there. Like, are there things that you see? Obviously, you spend a lot of time thinking about the space, at Serious Decisions and others. Like, what are the consistencies that you see? Is it just in great leadership? Is it in, like the market that they're in is winning, so they went along with that market? Like, what are some of the consistencies that be helpful reminders for folks?
Well, I think it doesn't just apply in business or in sales; it applies in life. Is those companies that are decisive, that don't labor decisions forever before they finally make one,
Yeah.
are the ones that really win. They're unafraid, they're unapologetic,
Yeah.
and they'd rather make a bad decision than no decision at all. And that comes from my days in the military too. If you're at a crossroads and you don't know which way to go somewhere.
That is such a good point, and it's so funny because I find being a vendor, being in sales a lot of my career, I feel like you could kind of tell the company's growth by how they buy and how they work with you. The
Yeah.
ones that move quickly, you're like, those are the companies that are growing, and the ones that can't get out of their own way and some political thing internally kiboshes the deal that they've invested so much time on, and someone else on the team says, yeah, this happened last year.
Yeah, and they also have,
you can project the growth from hearing those kind of things.
and they have an amazing recruiting process too. I imagine, just think about the companies that you've interviewed with, and they put you through 20 interviews with people that you're probably never going to interact with, and then 3 months down the path, they either make you the offer and you don't feel great about that, or they don't make you the offer and you don't feel great about that either. It's like, do I really want to go to work for a company that's going to take 3 months and 20 people to make a decision about me, or would I rather just go through one or two and then done?
Yeah, the conviction on the strategy and the pace, that's a really good call out, I think, of that.
Yeah, well, we get confident in decisive people, I think.
Yeah, that's a really, really good call out. Well, last question. What's like a resource that you find yourself going back to? It doesn't have to be about this particular space. It could be, fiction, nonfiction, favorite article, just person that you follow, podcast. Like, what's something out there for other folks that are, listening here, trying to, up-level themselves, and that you could recommend?
Well, I've been a student of strategy and planning for not just my entire career, but really most of my life. I'm always thinking about how to do something better, how to improve myself, how to how to just get that advantage. And I think one of the most prolific writers I've seen in the last few years, and he's been around for a while, but Robert Greene. You might be familiar with him, 48 Laws of Power.
Yes, yeah, I
Um,
just reread that
there
actually.
are 33 Strategies of War and The Art of Seduction. You should read all three of those. I know I bought one and then the other two, and I consumed them all in about a period of a month because they're just so brilliantly written. They bring it back to history. They show you
Yeah, I love the
examples of how it's
examples in
worked.
them. Yeah, those are
Yeah.
great.
So I think if you could choose any resource, it would be that. And it just they're so brutally honest too. Like there's no spin on it.
Yeah, no, another one that reminds me of that I always go back to is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of a bit of that with like the anecdotes and just truisms of how, the people in the world works. And yeah.
Yeah, was that was Dale Carnegie, right? So
Yes.
and written, I think, in the 50s before we started policing all of our language. They would just be very,
In the 30s,
very frank.
actually. It was actually,
Yeah,
I believe, yeah, like before World War II, in a bit of like post-depression. A lot of those learnings were from, I think, business people that kind of figure out how to thrive in really, really challenging markets. So,
yeah, brutal honesty.
yeah, amazing. Well, appreciate you taking the time. This was fun to jam on as me thinking about, how can we be more decisive, make faster decisions. But no, this was awesome. Appreciate you
Thanks,
taking the
Ross.
time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.